basically is to just keep focusing on how your students can apply all of those strategies to their own reading. You know, there's absolutely no point in learning something like the 44 sounds in the English language and, you know, how each of those sounds could be represented if you're not knowing how to apply that knowledge to reading. Fair enough? So everything that I talk about today is going to be, what does that mean to the kids as a reader, and how do you help them to do that? I want to really focus on what has the greatest impact on students' reading improvement. What do you think it is? What do you think has the greatest impact on every one of your students, that if you did more of this, it would make a big difference to their reading?
Being read to.
That is huge, and there's even a bigger one than that. Reading themselves, all right? But you've hit the nail on the head with those two. Now, if I am read to a lot, that's really, really important, isn't it? All right? You need to hear what the language is like even, and there's a million reasons for reading aloud to kids. But if they never get to read themselves, how will they ever get better at reading? So we're really going to look at what that is and how you do that in your classrooms. Some of you already are. That's what first thing I ask people is, in your classrooms, do your kids do lots of reading? Do you have classroom libraries for that to happen? They're my two biggest questions. And so if you can say, yep, that's me, then you're really doing a great job already. But within that then, I need to know a lot about my students. So how do I find that out? Otherwise, I really can't do any planning. And so we're going to talk more about how to do that and what sort of planning we'll do. Because I want them to not only be really good readers, I want them to love reading, all right? Most of my work, in fact, I was only realised the other day, this is the first time this year I've actually spoken to a group of people. I'm usually invited to do loads of that, and I cringe every time actually, because I'm always nervous about it, and I think, I don't know these people, you know, will they really want to hear anything from me, but whatever. But my work is nearly always just in schools with kids in classrooms. I figured that's where I get most enjoyment, sorry about that, and feel like I'm doing the best that I can to help the teachers I work with. And so I'm very aware of what works, what doesn't work, especially to get kids loving reading, all right? Most of my schools are what I don't call them disadvantaged kids. They have lots of other things going for them, but they're certainly from very, what's the best way of describing the home life when it's, like for some of them, I just think, you poor things, I don't know how you even get up each day to come to school. They have such, what's the word for it? Traumatic lives. It's challenging. It's just, you know, it's sad, but you know, kids are so resilient, aren't they? It's amazing. But I can think of a reception boy last year. One prep teacher I worked with had 4 times as many boys in her class as girls. Now, if you've ever taught 5-year-olds, you know how hard that is. Right? And one boy screamed all day, another one attacked the other kids all day. And that kid's mother used to drop him off late every day, of course, late to school every day, and say to the teacher, good luck. So, you know, there's some of the classrooms I think I can help the most. But I find what the most fascinating thing is that's probably the thing that I haven't yet worked with a struggling reader in my 53 years of teaching, whose problem was that they didn't know how to use phonics. In fact, the thing that I most often have to do is stop them from only sounding out. Do you find that? Yes. Yeah. And what I have to do is really convince them that before they even try to sound out a word, they've got to understand the context of what they're reading. You know, first of all, what's it about? What's going on? Because that will give you so much information about what this word could possibly be. even what type of word is it in the sentence. So in order to know that, read on, reread, and see what comes out of your mouth, just because you know the way that language works. And those are the two things that I find I need to do most of all. But you know what? I couldn't even say that was for every kid. They're all different, aren't they? And our job is to find out, what do they have a misunderstanding about? Because if we can get them over that, I've not yet, oh, that's not true. I have actually worked with one person who I could not teach how to read. And that girl's 30 now and still can't read, and it's just, unfortunately, she would desperately love to read, but she just cannot remember a word even 5 minutes after learning it. It's just there's something in here that's preventing that. We've had to help her do her schooling in all sorts of other ways, but she's the only one. So I think that we all do a fantastic job because we have such a variety of kids, don't we? All of us. And we find ways to help all of them. So let's get on with it. So what really matters, the students need to be doing lots of independent reading. Now, in order for that to happen, then they need to have very easy access to a lot of books and other reading material. Very easy access. So what does that mean about where the books and the magazines and whatever should be? In the classroom. Okay? So it's a no-brainer, isn't it? That's where they should be. The school library is very important. I'm sure that you're always going, ladies, to the school library and getting multiple books to bring into your classroom. It's the way to keep refreshing what you've got, isn't it? You know, after all, kids at the start of the year are different at the end of the year, aren't they? So you need different kinds of books even. But of course, kids just love new books. It's one of the things, one of the schools I work at, we've been buying, I was just telling Phil this morning, I think in the last, and it's only 5 classrooms, this particular school. It's a small school, but we've spent $60,000 on books in the last 18 months. But we don't make sure that we're always buying some new ones, and kids are so excited about new books coming into their classroom, and I think you need to keep that going too. But easy access in the classroom. We'll talk a bit about that. And at that time, as teachers, we need to be meeting with those kids. And I've even started to get a bit worried about the word conference or conferring, because that sounds a bit like, whoa, I don't know what that is. But it really is just a conversation, all right? A meeting, a conversation, and conversation is two-way, isn't it? So that I can find out a lot about the student. One particular student who was in a secondary school where I worked, where they'd already decided that what they should do with the kids is break them up into groups of, you know, what they were like as readers. And one whole group were called the non-readers. Right? And they had a special program that some wonderful professor from Queensland provided for them. She gave a test that decided where they were. So a non-reader, for example, could get 37 out of 70 for the test, but be called a non-reader. Okay? Now, how did they do anything in the test? Right? And do you know, I went there when they were already 2 years into this, and in those 2 years, those kids who were called the non-readers had not read one book. They were not given anything to read. They were given what? When they went to their little group, what sorts of things do you think the teacher did with them? Phonics exercises, and activities like go around the room, and if I say the letter P, you have to tell me a word that starts with P, until they ran out, and the one left is the winner. Now, wasn't that great? Right? So I wanted to find out about their reading. So I sort of got some books, not knowing them, thinking, well, you know, will this boy be able to read this one? Let's try it out. And if he can, then perhaps I might try a more complex one. And he said, oh, wait a minute, I've got some books in my bag. My mum buys me books at home. That's how I do my reading. So would you like to hear me read one of those? Isn't it dreadful what can happen to some kids? I took the principal to show him what was happening, and that very day he closed that program down. Wow, what a principal. There's always somebody who's the real rah-rah behind something like that in the school, isn't there? So he had to give her another job. I don't think she's ever forgiven me, but, you know, for those kids, you know, we have to be there, you know, the champion for them, don't we? And, you know, the kids in the top group were the only ones who did any comprehension work. And guess what their comprehension work was? Read this and answer these questions, right? So no one actually taught them comprehension. They were being constantly tested on comprehension, really. No teaching of it. It was just activities to do, like stars and cars we were talking about before. You know, no one actually teaches. You just give these activities to do. So, you know, it's so important to be finding out everything about them. Like this boy read at home. Another girl was really very hesitant as a reader, but she wanted to read the same books as the other girls were. And so we got audio books for her so that she could read whatever the other teenage girls were reading, because then she could be part of the conversation. That's what they want to be, isn't it? So it's really finding out about every child and how we can help them. And only by having a conversation with them, things they do at home are often very different to at school. And then I can find out what I need to teach, but I know a lot about what I need to teach. I just need to find out who needs what. That's our biggest job, isn't it? All right? So how do we do that? So why I now always say this is the starting point, and I wish I'd known this too when I first went to New York. I was thinking that teachers needed to know a lot about shared reading and guided reading and blah, blah, blah. But what I really had to get happening was that there were books in classrooms and kids were reading, because that opens up the Pandora's box. Teachers would then want to know much more about, well, when I'm listening to a child read, what am I listening for? And if I find a problem, what'll I do about it? All right, that's where it comes from. So get reading first, and you know what? That will also mean right from that very first day, you're actually doing what is the most important thing to improve your students' reading. They're going to be reading. So we're not wasting a day. We're not saying, oh, by the end of next term, I will have taught you blah, 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 and then you'll be a better teacher and the kids' reading will be better. We don't have to wait for anything. Get going. So that you've all got, no matter whether it's a reception class or those of you who are from a secondary school, I've done lots of work with secondary schools and helping set up area libraries right throughout the school, because just the library is not enough. It's not accessible enough. And we've got lots of classrooms with lots of books in them for kids to immediately get a book to read and always have their own book to read. And that's what we mean by accessible. Right there, they've got it, there's plenty more to choose from. There's research about that, believe it or not. The more accessible the books are, the more children will read. So it's very important, isn't it? Yeah. Do you know, one of the things I always think is, what do I do as a reader? Now, my husband and I love to read in bed, particularly in the mornings. You know, we're now 73, we're allowed to stay in bed a bit longer in the mornings, you know. Like getting up at 6:30 for these things has just about killed me. But what we do when we're reading is I'm always saying, hey, listen to this, all right? Or did you know blah, 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 all right? And our reading is very much making comments, asking questions. If I'm reading something online, I'll send a copy to him, you know, because I want him to read it too so we can talk about it, right? So, and he does the same to me. So that's what a reader does. Now we've got a classroom with, you know, 25, 30 kids. Can we all talk at once? Will that, affect other people? Or do we need quiet reading? So if we do talk, then it's quiet and it won't disturb someone else. That's very different to silent, isn't it? Right? So the words we use make a big difference. So also, if someone else is really engrossed in their reading, is that a suitable time to interrupt them? No. But hang on to it, because at the end of independent reading time, there'll be time to talk as a whole class and to each other, or go off and find a spot and talk to each other about your reading. And in fact, we should be building it in as part of the reading time. Reading is also response. Who's the great person who wrote lots about response to reading? Terrific person from Harvard University. What was her name? It's the trouble with getting old, I forget them. But anyway, she wrote about how you weren't really reading unless you were also responding. Now, you can respond just even personally, your emotion when you're reading something, what you're thinking about is response. But to also discuss, I was just going to say like you would around the dining table, but I don't know, I find loads of families with the kids I'm working with don't even have dinner together. So to say while you're around the dining table, have a conversation about things is not always going to work. But it's important, isn't it? It's like you come out of a movie. If you've gone with someone else, what do? You want to... You don't ask questions of each other. Who is the main character? Right? But you just want to make conversation, make remarks, ask questions. Do you know, my research in my thesis was actually observing kids in homes where they were read to before they started school, and observing what was actually going on. Was it just a parent reading to children, or was something else happening? And also, I followed those children into the first year at school and what happened. So I noticed that a really big part of a parent reading to a child, that the child asked lots of questions. They actually interrupted the reading quite a bit, making comments, taking the book physically, turning back pages, making comments, asking questions. Parents would even say things like, oh, that was like when we went to your grandma's and blah, blah, blah. A lot of conversation. But children asking questions and making comments was a big part of it. So I watched these kids, I followed each one of them into their classrooms, and the first time teachers would perhaps use a big book, these children who were used to interrupting would actually come out and physically do things with that book or ask a question, all right? And the teachers would say, you need to be quiet, we're reading, and at the end, the teacher asked the questions. Right? Now, fortunately, I think that's changing a lot in classrooms, but these kids, within 6 weeks of being at school, stopped asking questions. That's shocking, isn't it? And I know, again, it's different in a whole classroom, but you've got to allow, even if it's just for this bit, I want to read all of this to you because it's such beautiful language and we want to hear all of it without any interruptions. Or there are times you can allow interruptions and the kids can learn how to interrupt without affecting the others. All of those things. You know how they'll do things like, oh, I've got a dog. It's got nothing to do with the story. How do you deal with that? So I'm not saying it's easy in a classroom in comparison with a one-on-one child. But, one of the major comprehension strategies is questioning. And it's not someone else asking you questions, it's what do you do as a reader? How you keep questioning. Like, if I'm reading this book, and if I want to demonstrate this to kids about this is what readers do, I would actually say, I'm going to read aloud to you today, and first of all, part of what I'm going to do is tell you what's going on in my head when I'm reading. Because there's a lot about reading that we can't really demonstrate unless we tell them what's going on in here, can we? They can see us read, right, but what's going on in here? So I would say, well, I notice one of the things that I do a lot when I first start to read something is I tend to have a lot of questions. For example, when I'm reading a story or some piece of fiction, and the back cover says, 3 girls, one summer, a friendship that changed their lives. Now, what's going on in your head at the moment? 3 girls, one summer, a friendship that changed your lives. I wonder what's happened. I wonder what this event is that's changed their lives. This particular summer. I wonder who these girls are. You know, where is it? I've got lots of questions about who they are, where is it, when it was, and what happened. Because that's what I know happens in fiction, right? So I'm wondering. And in fact, I even find the word wondering to be more helpful for the kids than questioning. You know why? They're used to questioning being the teacher asks questions. And I've used the word wondering, then it's like that's what we're doing. So, do you know Kate DiCamillo, by the way? She's wonderful. If you have not read anything yourself by Kate DiCamillo, you have to, right? She's an American writer. 2 of her books have won, what is it in America, the Newbery Medal. I think one of them would be Because of Winn-Dixie. Have you read that one? If you haven't, you want to start with something, start with that one probably, but they're all phenomenal. Oh, you know the movie, The Tale of Despereaux, that little mouse? That was her book, was what was used as the basis for that movie. She's a fabulous writer. Vocabulary like no one else uses. And you know, in case I don't get to say it later, do you know the best way to improve your kids' vocabulary? Read. No, read to them and have them read. Both of those. You know, we want them to add about 3,000 words a year to their vocabulary. And you know, we couldn't possibly, no matter how we taught the words, we couldn't do that, could we? But you know, fortunately, if they read a lot, and there's a proviso on that, on what they read, then their vocabulary will increase incredibly. Now, why do I say what they read? These kids that where I'm working with, the kids are really, you know, tough times for them. Of course, getting them into reading is a really big start, isn't it? Everybody loving reading. And those of you who are teachers with kids from, say, grade 3 on, what do they love to read lots of? Online stuff? They actually don't. And you know, it's interesting, there's already research coming out where kids are saying they prefer books, they prefer print to anything online. Fascinating, isn't it? And everybody was worried that bookshops would go out of, you know, they're not. But, and I'm not saying they don't like to read online, because they love to read, you know, Facebook or whatever it is, or all of that sort of stuff. But in terms of books, do you know what their favourites are? They want to read lots of? Who teaches a grade 3? Okay.
My boys love Captain Underpants and something else that's got comic, it's kind of like a comic. Can't think what it's called.
Bad Guys? Bad Guys, which are phenomenal. Do they also love Ando, all of the Ando books? Diary of the Wimpy Kid, okay? The Treehouse books, right? Now, just to find out for myself, I read all of the Captain Underpants books. I did not meet one new word. Okay? So, my kids could read, and some kids will actually talk about how much they read those books and they read them over and over. Great, they're reading. But you know what? Their reading's not growing. Not in any way. In every single way, their reading is staying static. So it's my responsibility to find other books that they will like just as much as those and get them reading those as well, isn't it? So when I say that about vocab, you know, and every little thing I'm saying today, I'm saying because it makes a big difference. Need books? Yes. Variety, absolutely essential. Need to read often? Yes. But what are they reading? How could we introduce them to lots of other books, right? So even when we look here, I'm fascinated too, and I hadn't realised this until yesterday. Big smelly bear, two bullies. Boys love particular types of books, don't they? Okay. And when I ask, and always we're asking the kids to organise these books. This is their classroom library. How are they going to organise them? Kids will even come up with groupings like, these are girly books and these are boy books, right? And I might not have ever noticed that myself, but they just do. But it could be humour, adventure, fantasy, all the genres. In this classroom, it's the Sunny and Crackers books, and I don't even remember them. Solo books, funny books, chapter books, play books, so books with plays in them, new books, books with levels, very, very small amount. Think of a good bookshop, right? Because one of the things that a bookshop does is also make sure the books are, as many of them in the bookshop are front-facing. Why? They could fit a lot more books on the shelf if they were just spines. Sorry? See the covers, and what does that make you do? Pick it up, all right? So it's for that reason, makes it much more appealing. But also, if you pick up any of those little boxes, you can easily go through and find a book you want. Now, we're talking about accessibility in lots of ways. And if I see just a whole shelf of spines, I know how long it takes me to find a book in a shelf of spines. So I don't want the kids spending all their time looking for something to read. I want them to think, I'm interested in such and such, perhaps a particular author, perhaps a topic or whatever. Bang, now let me find something that I can read, because that's very important, isn't it? Okay. All right, so these kids are independently reading. We agree they also need to talk, etc. During that time, the teacher will be somewhere else in the room having a conversation with kids about their reading.